Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Welcome to All Things Policy. I'm Aishwaria Sonavane, research analyst for Pakistan Studies at the Takshashila Institution, and your host for today's episode. We are recording this a day after a fragile 2-week ceasefire between the United States and Iran, mediated by Pakistan, came into effect. Though it already appears precarious, Israel has continued, if not escalated, its bombardment of Lebanon, claiming that the ceasefire does not apply there. In response, Iran has warned that it may abandon the deal entirely if Israeli attacks are not halted against the Hezbollah. To help us make sense of these developments and the broader conflict in West Asia, I'm joined by Kingshuk Chatterjee. He's a professor in the Department of History at the University of Calcutta and a distinguished fellow at the Center for Middle East and Global Order in Berlin. Professor Chatterjee, glad to have you here with me today. So before we get into the current conflict, let's put this in some historic context. You've argued that West Asia is in a structural crisis because of the power dispensations forged in the 20th century. The mandates, the post-colonial borders, and the Cold War alliances no longer reflect the ground realities of today. So can you help us understand, can you explain what you mean and how that maps onto what we are seeing today in Lebanon, Iran, and even Gaza?
Yeah. So, see, the whole of the Middle East is a very long and complicated story. To keep it very simple, this conflict that we see today is coming out largely a sense of insecurity that is affecting the state of Israel. That is, I would say, a result of Israeli policy towards the Palestinian people who are living in those sections of Israel which are not part of the state of Israel, and yet they are being ruled by them, the occupied territories, as we call them, which was originally meant to be part of an Arab state of Palestine. But because of historical developments, as they have been over the last 80 years, Israel has squeezed out space of the Palestinians for a kind of autonomous existence. Mm-hmm. The only problem is that this stretch of land that we today read of as Israel and Palestine, it is inhabited by around 14 million people, 7 of whom are Jewish and 7 of whom are Arabs. And they're fighting for the same stretch of land. Now, as a result of the events of 7th October 2023, the Hamas terrorist attack on the Israeli state, the Israeli society has finally come to a position where they are arguing that they cannot exist alongside a separate sovereign state of Palestine. Mm-hmm. So, for the first time since the 1790s, when they had decided, they had reconciled themselves to the creation of a sovereign state of Palestine, they're now walking back on both that commitment and their assessment of the security situation. And evidence would suggest that Israel is now working towards a progressive and continuous marginalization of the Palestinians, of Arabs living in Israel, to a point where they would either leave or they would accept a second-class existence. Mm-hmm. Now, in order for Israel to do that, it needs to have the acquiescence of most of its Arab neighbors, all of whom occasionally have had problems with how the Israelis have treated the Palestinians in their midst. And it occasionally also, the dynamics of local politics, regional politics, has brought in people who are not even Arabs, standing for the right of the Arab Palestinians for their separate sovereign space. Iran is a good example. Mm-hmm. Lebanon is another. There was a point of time when the Palestinians, displaced by the Israelis, had gone and sought shelter in Lebanon. From there, they were trying to mount a resistance to Israel, which took Israel into Lebanon in the 1980s. And since then, Israel has tried to keep its border areas with Lebanon in such a sort of sanitized kind of environment that there could be no challenge to the Israeli state post. Now, once Israel has decided now to finally go back on the idea of a sovereign state of Palestine, one of these areas from where military challenge could be mounted against the state of Israel is Lebanon. So Israel is going after Lebanon and hammer and tongs. And even if tomorrow peace was actually to be concluded between US and Iran, and the US was able to persuade Israel to stand down in its struggle against Iran, Israel would probably still go after Lebanon till the point that no organization like the Hezbollah could mount a challenge to its policy that is about to unfold in the West Bank. So it's kind of victim of history of the last 100 years that you find caught in this conflict on all sides.
Right. But when you say even if the US stops supporting Israel, is Israel militarily capable of continuing to attack Lebanon the way it does?
Lebanon,
does
yes.
US not have any control? Okay.
No, it doesn't. Israel, in the present condition, is willing to keep on fighting against Iran, but it does not have the wherewithal without replenishment from the Americans.
Right.
Lebanon is a different story because in Lebanon, Israel is fighting only the militia of the Hezbollah, which at its height had around 100,000 soldiers. That the Israelis can take on, the kind of provisioning of arms and ammunitions. The supply chain of Hezbollah has been disrupted since the fall of the Assad regime.
Right.
Iran would find it now difficult to land arms and ammunitions because the Lebanese state would not allow it. Earlier, it used to be smuggled through Syria. So that supply link has been disrupted. Hezbollah's military capability, therefore, cannot improve in the foreseeable future. Israel has enough munitions to take on Hezbollah. Whether it's able to actually take it out remains to be seen because Israel has been trying this from the 1980s and has not succeeded.
Right. When you say the Lebanese state, I'm sorry, I'm just very curious. So I'm going to get a little deeper into this. When you say the Lebanese state will not allow it, does that even stand true in the present context when their capital city is being bombed?
Yes, it still does because the Lebanese Hezbollah, for many Lebanese, especially those in the southern part of Lebanon, is doing a cardinal service by standing up to Israeli aggression.
Right.
But elsewhere, the Hezbollah, which is essentially a Shia militia, there are different denominations of Christians and Muslims inside Lebanon who would want to have no truck with the Hezbollah. They would not want to be dominated by Shia militia because the Shia constitute less than 25% of the total Lebanese population. It has a disproportionate kind of military and therefore political influence in Lebanese life. But the Lebanese state has, for the last 40 years, been trying to reduce the military capabilities of the various militia that have been part of Lebanese party politics. And Hezbollah is the one with which it has been least successful. However, if arms and ammunition would need to be supplied into Lebanon, if it is to come through the airport is under the central government.
Right.
So the military would certainly not allow any such contraband items to come in. And anything, after all, that comes into the hands of the Hezbollah, a single gun in the hand of Hezbollah is a gun trained against the Lebanese state. So, as I said, it cannot be, these arms and ammunitions cannot make their way into Lebanon legitimately. So the Lebanese state would not allow it. That is the argument I was trying to make.
Fascinating. So what does the future of West Asia look like? Is the future simply a permanent state of fragmented sovereignty where no single power can ever hold the center?
In the short to medium run, I see the progressive diminution of American influence, progressive assertion of Israeli military capability, which is actually stemming from a sense of insecurity.
Right.
And as a result, for this periodic lashing out by Israel, against those of its neighbors, which Israel perceives as posing any kind of threat to its existence in the way it exists, subjugating the Palestinians. Israel would keep on running after them, it would seem. And so, for the foreseeable future, I think we are looking at a turbulent and a conflict prone environment. Yes.
That's on that very grim note. I would like to move to the country in question, Iran specifically, and I want to understand the Iranian Revolution and its sort of relevance today, right? The revolution was an ideological event as it was a political one. But how much of the ideology of 1979 still drives Iranian foreign policy today and also its domestic policy?
In a sense, the 1979 revolution was a political movement which was hijacked by a group with an ideological agenda.
Mm-hmm.
But it was actually not so much an ideological agenda, it was a different political agenda, shall we say. You see, Iran witnessed the most serious attempt at not political, let's say economic and social modernization in the Middle East.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a kind of industrialization agenda undertaken that was breathtaking in its scope, powered by the oil wealth. It also involved a lot of corruption, a lot of disaffection among people who could see the blatant crony capitalism that was shaping the Iranian society in the early 20th century. And there was eventually a backlash when the economic benefits of modernization failed to be distributed.
Mm-hmm.
There was a political movement seeking greater democratization of the Iranian political scenario. And there was also a social revolution, which was looking for redistribution of economic assets. When the revolution happened, when the Pahlavi monarchy was overthrown,
Mm-hmm.
the question was whether Iran was to become a constitutional democracy that it was trying to be from 1906, or whether it was to be an Islamic or, let's say, representing the interests of a socially conservative and economically backward understanding of Islam than the secular modernists wanted. And what happened in the heady days of 1979 and 80 was that the socially conservative, economically backward section with a redistributive economic agenda
Mm-hmm.
acquired the levers of power in the state and marginalized the Democrats. And this process was actually facilitated by the invasion of Iraq, which takes place in the 1980s. This war goes on for about 8 years. And behind the smokescreen of the war, the main protagonists of democracy were either physically eliminated or were sent into exile,
Mm-hmm.
so that the socially conservative, economically redistributive agenda and their protagonists acquired a complete stranglehold on the what becomes the Islamic Republic. The Islamic Republic was actually a hijacking of a democratic agenda,
Mm-hmm.
where the Islamists and the secularists had worked together. Post 1980s, Iran began with a kind of economic adjustment. They wanted to pursue economic liberalization, which witnessed a lot of resistance from the conservative beneficiaries of the revolution.
Mm-hmm.
And since then, we see an alignment between those who want a greater say for democratic forces and greater say for economic equity, talking about liberalization of the Islamic Republic, whereas the conservatives speak of the revolutionary system as a good in itself, that they would claim that the benefits of the revolution have been distributed much more broadly than the pre-revolutionary system had. And therefore, it is in the interest of the larger masses to keep the revolutionary system in place.
Right.
This basically characterizes Iranian politics in the last 30 years.
Fascinating. So, just coming back to this, how much of this ideology still drives Iranian foreign policy today? Do you think the regime, and not just the regime, the broader Iranian population now stands more in solidarity with the existing system? Because there is an outside threat which has stated that we want to take down this regime.
Precisely. Whenever there is an existing threat from outside the country,
Right.
Iranians have tended to rally behind the regime no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
However authoritarian or however repressive, people rally around the regime simply for their own survival.
Mm-hmm.
But once the war ends, the normal politics of dissidence is almost guaranteed to return.
Right.
And with the death of the Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei,
Mm-hmm.
you might actually see the kind of protests that characterized December, January 2025, 2026, or the hijab protests of 24.
Mm-hmm.
Those kind of protests are likely to grow in their intensity and frequency going forward.
And is the Iranian political system still consolidated, still in place to sort of tackle this domestic uprising, if there is any?
While the war is ongoing, the regime would keep its ranks closed.
Mm-hmm.
But once the war is over and normal politics resumes, there is a good chance that there would be segments within the Islamic Republic who would want serious and thoroughgoing reform in the state structure. Of course, the outcome of it is not as certain as the possibility of it.
Fascinating. I want to talk about the axis of resistance, right? Iran, Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis. They've all taken enormous losses. Hezbollah has been severely degraded. Hamas's leadership is eliminated. And Iran itself is struck. And in this conflict, we understand that the stakes for Iran is only survival. But is the axis of resistance still a coherent strategic project, or is it fracturing now?
Very good question. So let me just contextualize this idea of axis of resistance. Israel and Iran, they really have no differences that can be settled across a negotiation table.
Absolutely.
Iran's posturing against Israel, as its support of Hamas or Hezbollah reveals, is essentially as a strategic second front against American pressure on Iran. Whenever the United States increased its pressure on Iran, Iran would open up a second front against Israel to distract American attention. This was the logic when Iran began to support Hezbollah in the 1980s and continued to support in the 1990s, and then exponentially developed Hezbollah's capabilities in the 2000s. Okay? The principal purpose in supporting Hamas and Hezbollah was to create trouble for Israel, with which Iran otherwise had no grounds. Now, the axis of resistance that emerges in the wake of the Syrian civil war, where the Iraqi militias, the Hashd al-Shabi, the Houthi militias, Hamas, Hezbollah, they become a larger kind of regional menace because these are supported by the IRGC Al-Quds Brigade, who were actually in charge of Iran's nuclear program. When Iran entered into the JCPOA agreement and decided to shelve its nuclear option, the group that was affected within the Iranian body politic was the IRGC that was pushing for its nuclear weapons capability. The IRGC has been working with the logic that unless Iran is a nuclear weapon state, you cannot guarantee regime security. America will go for regime change operations.
Right.
Obtain nuclear capability, this will go. There are others in the Iranian system who want Iran to become a normal economy in the global economic order, who believe that this would result in further sanctions. They would prefer instead to gain nuclear weapons capability without actually crossing the nuclear threshold. This is the group that negotiated JCPOA, where Iran was allowed to retain its capability of nuclear enrichment, but was made to forego the weaponization option.
Right.
But Iran wants to maintain that technological capability of going nuclear if required. Right? Now, when the nuclear weapons program was being put on the ice, IRGC had to be compensated for its acquiescence to the JCPOA. This compensation was translated in terms of a complete free hand in setting up proxies that would guarantee inviolability of Iranian frontier.
Right.
So whenever a power would want to go against Iran, these proxies could be activated. There is a lot of things about how to allocate funds, personal benefits of the revolutionary elite by getting a huge supply of funds, because not all the funds that is made over to it is immediately funneled into the axis of resistance.
Right.
So there is a story of corruption, but there is also this story of creating a defensive capability as an alternative to nuclear weapons capability. So now that this axis of resistance is very badly badgered and it is unlikely to be revived in the foreseeable future. And given the experience of this 36-day war and before that the 12-day war, Iran's threat frontiers, the definitions of Iran's threat perceptions are now higher than ever. So the chances of Iran continuing to invest in the axis of resistance in the long run are limited by Iran's capability of keeping its nuclear program alive. If Iran is able to somehow redirect resources back to the nuclear program, it may lose its interest in the axis of resistance in the long run. So either the one or the other, they would have to keep alive, because the chances of Iran going for a conventional rearmament does not look readily very likely.
That's fascinating. So, what you're trying to say is the race to the bomb, they'll get more desperate.
Correct.
To either get that bomb. And what countries in the region or in the world who could help Iran achieve these objectives? I would
None.
assume China would not be as inclined. Pakistan, of course, has its own shortcomings when it comes to helping
And Iran would not need, at the stage where it is now, Iran would not need any major technological lift to get past the 90% enrichment frontier. Iran has done it up to 60%. And if it is able to develop its nuclear program clandestinely this far, it can continue to do so in the future. The only thing that would keep nuclear weaponry away from Iran's grasp is that Iran needs to develop a delivery capability. Right now, condensing the nuclear thing into a warhead is something that has escaped Iran. Iran will probably obtain it within a year or two if they keep at it relentlessly, which is the reason why Israel needs to keep kicking the can down the road so that Iran's nuclear weapons capability gets lengthened out over a long period.
Absolutely.
But Iran's race for the bomb is on, regardless of what the agreement might be forthcoming, if any is forthcoming.
And that's the most ironic, right? The period of this race to the war will also make Iran much more vulnerable.
Yes.
Than it was.
And that is the reason why you will probably have periodic Israeli attempts to, as they say, mowing the lawn. They will keep sort of removing the weeds as they grow.
So and now the precedent is set. After you kill the spiritual leader, you have set a precedent that, okay, once you have already attacked Iran.
Don't think of him as a spiritual leader. That man was the head of the Iranian state. So the right leader. Now, there are no red lines.
Fascinating. So when you look at the history of West Asia, what kind of resolution is even possible here? Are we looking at a diplomatic framework, maybe a temporarily frozen conflict, or a redesign of the whole regional order in West Asia?
A redesign of the entire regional order is exactly what is required. Problem is that the actors involved have so little trust in themselves
Right.
that the only way a regional order can be conceived of is in the face of a common external enemy. This was actually the reason why the Israelis had, over the last 30 years, tried to befriend the Arabs by isolating Iran. And Iran, over the last 5 or 7 years, was trying to befriend the Arabs to isolate the Israelis. Right now,
Right.
Iran has lost all limited amount of trust that it had been able to develop over the past several years. And Israel never managed to develop any. It was only the fear of Iran that was keeping the Gulf closer to Israel than to Tehran. At present, it becomes very clear that Israel is as much a liability as America can appear to be.
Yeah.
And Iran is no way to offset that liability. So, as far as I can see in the foreseeable future, the Persian Gulf remains in turmoil.
On that note, Professor, thank you so much for this wonderful history lesson. It helps me, and I'm sure it helps our listeners to put everything in context. Thank you so much for joining this episode.
Thanks for having me. Thanks.
If you liked our show, dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs. Check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.